Okay, so this is a quick video to show you where the quadratic formula comes from. So far we've learned about solving equations by completing the square. So what we're going to do is we're going to complete the square in a general equation. So this is the equation in standard form, and when you set it equal to 0, if we solve this equation, we found the zeros for a quadratic formula, but it's not dependent on specific numbers. We've got placeholder variables here, a, b, and c, and that's how the quadratic formula is derived. Okay, so let's go ahead and derive the quadratic formula. So if we were going to complete the square on this equation, the first step would be to divide everything by a. So if we do 0 divided by a, we still get 0. Ax squared, so this is divided by a, divided by a, divided by a, divided by a. And this cancels out and we're left with x squared plus b over a times x plus c over a. Okay, so we've simplified the equation because x squared now doesn't have a coefficient. So the next thing we want to do is we want to complete the square here. So let's go ahead and move the c over a to the other side of the equation. So if we subtract c over a on both sides, we now have c over a is equal to x squared plus b over a times x. And now what we want to do is we want to add something so that it makes this side of the equation a perfect square. Well, what do we add? You take the term, the coefficient of this term, b over a, you divide it by 2 or multiply by 1/2, and then you square it. And that tells you what you would need out here in order to be able to complete the square. So that's the same thing as b over 2a squared, which is equal to b squared over 4a squared. So that's what we want to add to the outside of the equation. So let's add that here. B squared over 4a squared. If we add it to this side of the equation, we also have to add it to this side of the equation. And so now we have b squared over 4a squared minus c over a equals x squared plus b over a x plus b squared over 4a squared. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and move this up. Okay, now that I've moved it up, I'm going to continue to simplify. So the right side of the equation can be written as the square is now completed, and so what goes inside is x plus something squared. Well, the something is this term divided by 2, b over a times 1/2, which is this, b over 2a. So what goes inside is b over 2a. And you can check this if you want to see that x plus b over 2a times x plus b over 2a does in fact equal the right side of the equation here. On this side of the equation, we're going to get a common denominator, and then we're going to combine like terms. So we need 4a squared on the bottom here, so we got to multiply by 4a on the top and on the bottom. So you get b squared over 4a squared minus 4ac. So 4a times the top and 4a times the bottom gives us 4a squared. Okay, now we can combine the left side of the equation into b squared minus 4ac all over 4a squared. And that's equal to x plus b over 2a squared. Alright, now we want to solve for x. That's the goal here. So we're going to take the square root of both sides. Square root of this side and the square root of this side. And when you take the square root, remember to include plus or minus on the other side. So now we have plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over the square root of 4a squared. And I went ahead and wrote it like this instead of as a fraction under a radical. I wrote it as a fraction of 2 radicals. Okay, and then on this side we now just have x plus b over 2a. Alright, I'm going to move this up also. Okay, and now I'm going to simplify even further. I'm going to get x by itself by subtracting b over 2a from both sides, minus b over 2a. And what I get is negative b over 2a plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. And now the square root of 4a squared is 2a. And that's equal to x. Okay, now I can combine this as one fraction and I get the quadratic formula. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a is equal to x. So that is where the quadratic formula comes from. You solve this equation for x, and you end up with this formula. And using this formula, you can just plug in the values for a, b, and c to any equation and find the zeros if you plug them into this formula. So that's the derivation of the quadratic formula.